I'd like to call to order the Zoning Board of Examiners and Appeals on May 9th. Please call the roll.
Mr. Vig?
Here.
Mr. Carth?
Here.
Mr. Ron?
Here.
Mr. Patrick?
Here.
Mr. Dunham?
Here.
Ms. Vlad? Here. Ms. Eicher? Mr. Hart?
Here.
Ms. Dole?
Thank you. First item of business are the minutes from Thursday, January 10th, 2013. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes? Okay, I have a motion from Mr. Vig and seconded by Mr. Cars. Any comments on the minutes? Any comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I wasn't here, so I'll be abstaining from voting on the minutes.
Okay, thank you. Any? Ms. Dole?
I likewise was not here.
Okay. I'd like to disclose for the record that I was not at this meeting, but I did listen to the tape for that evening and will be voting on the minutes. Any other comments? Seeing none, let's vote. Okay. It looks like those minutes are approved. Next item is are the minutes from March 14th, 2013. I'd like to have a motion on that. I have a motion from Mr. Patrick, and I'm looking for a second from Mr. Cars. Are there any comments on these minutes? Any comments? Seeing none, let's vote. No.
There.
Okay. Looks like those minutes have been approved. Unanimous.
They did.
Okay. All right. Next item on our agenda is disclosures. Do we have any disclosures for this evening? Mr. Patrick.
I have two disclosures this evening. For the record, I was not present on the March 14, 2013 meeting, but I have listened to the meeting audio and reviewed all the materials and will participate in the approval of those the resolution 2013-003. And the second is in the case tonight, case 2013-059. I would just like to disclose that the company I work for did provide a letter of non-objection for the variance.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Any other disclosures? Ms. Walad?
I'd like to disclose that I wasn't present at the April 11th, 2013 meeting, and I'll be abstaining from voting on resolutions 2013-004 and 2013-005.
Okay. Any other comments or disclosures? Mr. Hart.
Mr. Chairman, I was not a member of the board on January 10th, 2013, and will be abstaining from voting on resolutions 2013-001 and 2013-002. Also related to case 2013-059 tonight, would just like to disclose that I own a rental property within a block from that property and also serve on the Silver Fox Condo Association board, but I do not have a substantial financial interest in the case tonight.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Ms. Dole?
Yes, I likewise was not a member of the board on January 10, 2013, and will be abstaining from voting on resolutions 2013-1 and 2013-2.
Okay, thank you. Are there any objections to having Mr. Patrick participate in this voting on the case tonight? And that is case 2013-059. No indication, so Mr. Patrick will have you participate on that. Let's see. Are there any objections to having Mr. Hart participate on that same case based on his comments? Seeing none, Mr. Hart, you'll be expected to participate on that case as well. For the record, and I should have probably done this before I asked, I did review the audio tape and the materials for case for resolutions 2013-001 and 2013-002, and I do plan to vote on the resolutions. So, seeing no other objections or comments, let's move forward with the resolutions. I still have a vote on my, do I need to clear that? Bear with us, we're having a little technical difficulty here, so.
It's not resetting.
Okay, hopefully I'm back on track here. So I'm looking for a motion for resolution 2013-001. Mr. Cars has made a motion and Mr. Big has seconded. Is there any discussion on the resolution before us? Seeing none, if you would, please vote. Okay, that resolution is passed with Mr. Hart and Ms. Dole abstaining. Next resolution is Resolution 2013-002. I'd like a motion on that one. Mr. Ron has made the motion. Mr. Patrick has seconded. Any comments on that motion? Seeing none, please vote. I guess we could have done this as a consent item, but that resolution is passed with Mr. Hart and Ms. Dole abstaining. Like a resolution or a no. I'd like to get a motion on Resolution 2013-003. Mr. Ron, did you provide that motion?
I'm happy to provide it, but I believe that was for the last
Okay.
resolution.
Mr. Vig provided the motion, Mr. Ron seconded. Any questions on this resolution? Seeing none, let's vote. That resolution passes unanimously. Okay, next resolution is 2013-004. Mr. Cars has made the motion, Ms. Dole has seconded. Any questions or comments on that resolution? Seeing none, please vote. That resolution passes with Ms. Walad abstaining. Okay. Excuse me.
Stuck again?
Yeah, I'm stuck again. Okay, I'm going to. All right, our last resolution to consider tonight is 2013-005. I'd like a motion on that one. Mr. Patrick has made the motion. Mr. Vig has seconded. Any comments or questions on that resolution? Seeing none, let's vote on that. That resolution also passes. So we're down to appearance requests on the agenda. We have none. There's no unfinished business or actions of public hearings. That moves us down to the regular agenda. And then moving from there, we don't have anything under resolutions for approval or other. We're moving to public hearings. The first case on the agenda tonight is actually a postponed case. It's 2013-039. That's been postponed until June 13th, 2013. So if you are here for that particular case and the petitioner's Corporate Leasing LLC, that case has been postponed for another month. And that is, the site address is 343 West 6th Avenue. So if you're here for that hearing, that has been postponed for another month. Our next case is,
Mr. Chair,
oh, yes. Yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Francis over in the corner. Could the board make a motion to approve the postponement? Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to get a motion to postpone. Mr. Vig has made the motion. Mr. Hart has seconded. Mr. Vig, did you want to speak to the motion?
Only given the applicant's desire to collect more information, I move we postpone until June 13th.
Mr. Hart?
I'm in agreement with that, sir.
Okay. Ms. Dole, did you have any comments?
I plan to abstain because I might have a conflict.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, let's vote on that. Okay. The vote to postpone that particular hearing is approved. Let's move down to case 2013-059. The petitioner is Huffman Wood Condominium Association. Is the petitioner here tonight?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The request is for a variance for an encroachment into the required yard setback. It's a request for a variance from AMC 2140-050 and AMC 2145-110 to allow an existing second floor deck on Unit 11 to encroach into the secondary front yard setback, and to allow an existing 8-foot high fence to remain in place. The area is generally located at Brandon Street and east of Silver Fox Lane. Before we get started tonight, I would like to go over the order of business for the variance request. I just introduced the variance request, and the board will hear and rule on any objections to the sufficiency of the notice, which will be provided by staff. Board will hear a brief staff presentation outlining the variance. On conclusion of the staff presentation, board members and the applicant may then direct questions to the staff through the chair. The applicant shall give his or her presentation. Through the proceedings, the burden of proof rests upon the applicant, who must convince the board by a preponderance of the evidence that the variance should be granted. On conclusion of the applicant's presentation, the board members and staff may then direct questions to the applicant through the chair. The hearing shall then be open to the public for testimony. All persons who testify may be questioned by the board, staff, or the applicant. At the conclusion of the public testimony, the staff, followed by the applicant, shall then have the right of rebuttal. The board will then proceed to develop oral findings and conclusions with regard to the variance request. The staff will reduce the oral findings and conclusions to a written document for subsequent adoption by the board at a later date. All decisions by the board by the board in cases of variances are appealable to Superior Court within 30 days of a written notice given to the appellant or to the applicant. So with that, I'm going to ask staff to present their case and present sufficiency of notice and then their case.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sufficiency of notice. The Planning Division mailed 137 public hearing notices. One public comment was received, and it was in opposition to the granting of both variances. The Old Seward Ocean View Community Council received the application as well and did not comment. Now for the report. The Planning Division finds that in regards to standard number 1, both variance requests, the standard appears not to be met. There are no creeks, wetlands, slopes, or other physical impediments affecting the property. However, the platting for this lot is unique. This lot is bordered by streets on 2 sides and an alleyway on the 3rd side. This triangular shape is defined as a corner lot by our zoning code. In regards to standard number 2, the division finds that both standards appear not to be met. The need for both variances does not arise from a physical impediment affecting the lot. In regards to standard number 3, the standard appears not to be met for both variance requests. The peculiarity of the lot is the triangular shape in which it was platted. The lot, therefore, has a front yard setback facing Silver Fox Lane, a secondary front yard setback facing Brandon Street. There are no physical conditions of the land which are particular to this lot besides the platting. And Part B, the need for both variances is a result of the petitioner's desire to keep the existing second-story deck in its current location with a 1.2-foot encroachment and to keep the existing 8-foot tall fence where 4 feet is the maximum permitted in the secondary front yard setback. In regards to standard number 4, the standard is met for the 1.2-foot encroachment of the deck into the secondary front yard setback. The the standard is not met for the variance to have an 8-foot tall fence in the secondary front yard setback. The encroachment of the deck into the 10-foot setback does not appear to negatively affect the public welfare. In regards to the 8-foot tall fence, there's no clear vision area violation. However, the fence is approximately 235 feet long on the east side of the property abutting Brandon Street, and there are no other fences that are allowed to be greater than 4 foot tall along Brandon Street. In regards to standard number 5, the standard is met for the deck encroachment variance, but not for the fence height variance. The requested variances are dimensional, would not allow a use that is otherwise prohibited in the zoning regulations. The 1.2 foot deck encroachment does not change the character of the zoning district or the neighborhood. Conversely, the 8-foot tall fence in the secondary front yard setback abutting Brandon Street may have a negative impact on the streetscape by walling off a section of the west side of Brandon Street. The standard is met for both variances for standard number 6. For standard number 7, the standard appears not to be met for either variance. No variance is needed to have a deck on unit 12695. Likewise, a 4-foot tall fence along the east boundary of the site would not require a variance either. Neither variance is the minimum variance that will make it possible for reasonable use of the land. The department recommends denial of the deck encroachment variance because standards 1, 2, 3, and 7 do not appear to be substantially met. The department also recommends denial of the fence height variance because standards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7 do not appear to be substantially met. If after the public hearing, the board finds that all 7 standards support approval are substantially met, then approval should be subject to conditions 1, 2, and 3 on page 6 of the staff packet. So the first condition of approval is just our standard condition to record a notice of zoning action with the approved as-built. Condition number 2 is the approval of the variance for the deck. And condition 3 is approval for the variance for the fence height. So if the board has findings that all 7 standards are met for both variance requests, then they could make one motion to approve conditions 1 through 3 on page 6. If the board finds that one variance is met, seeks to approve one variance but not the other, then it would be simple for the board to approve condition 1 and then whichever variance that they're seeking to approve. You could do 2 separate motions, one for each of these variances. 2 being the deck and 3 being the fence. Now there's one last thing to say, which is, and I couldn't figure out how to sort of fix this issue. If you look at condition number 1, it reads, this variance shall become effective upon recordation of the notice of zoning action, the resolution of approval, and an updated as-built being filed with the State of Alaska Recorder's Office. If both variances are approved, then they don't need to provide an updated as-built, and staff would ask that you strike that word from the approval because they've provided an original as-built. We don't need an updated as-built, that cost or any of that, right? But if the board approves one variance but not the other, then an updated as-built to accurately reflect what is approved, that it needs to stay in there. Of course, if the board denies both variances, then none of this matters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Is there any objection to the sufficiency of notice for this case? Seeing none, are there any questions from the board for staff? No questions? Mr. Big?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLaughlin, do you happen to know whether that interior street is a dedicated right-of-way to the municipality?
I believe that it is not a dedicated right-of-way, that it's really private street. I think that this was developed as multiple dwelling units on a single tract. It's Anchorage Municipal Code of Regulations 2190, and sort of the site condo ordinance. And so it's not a public street. I don't know if maintenance is private or public, but I don't believe that it's a public street.
Thank you.
But we still name streets, through the chair, Mr. Vig. We still name streets. It's a part of the emergency response. Thanks.
Mr. Cars?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, Mr. McLaughlin, the second variance request is to allow an 8-foot fence. And I can't say that I've seen many 8-foot tall fences. Most of them are 6-foot cedar fences. Looking at these pictures, it's unclear to me. I can't make a determination with that. I do see in the applicants, in the application, they identify it as a 8-foot fence. And then has the height of it been measured as far as you know?
I think I did not take measuring tape out there. The petitioner can speak to the height of the fence. They requested the variance.
Sure.
And also, I believe that this came to us through like a code enforcement action, that it was identified as I'm using the wrong terminology, but it was, there's been a process with building safety where they identified that the fence was taller than what's allowed, and that it was named to be 8 feet. So I took that to mean that it was 8 foot.
Thank you. Yes, I'll ask the petitioner that as well when it comes to their presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other comments or questions from the board? Seeing none, we'll turn to the petitioner. And if you would state your name for the record and spell your last name.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Laura Cantrell. Apologize, Francis. Good evening. My name is Laura Cantrell. I'm with Wiley Brooks Company. And I've been the property manager of this particular property since 2007, the original property manager. I really thank you for taking the time to review this case this evening. I want to provide a little bit of history on this particular property. I came on board, the developer, builder, hired me in 2007. He subsequently bailed on the property and filed bankruptcy, leaving construction matters incomplete, and then basically ended up just kind of walking away, and landscaping wasn't done. Initially, there were 2 phases of this particular property. He developed phase 2 before he developed phase 1, 16 units on each phase. The developer had installed foundations on phase 1 and subsequently illegally sold that phase of the property, leaving the association with just phase 2. From 2008 to 2010, 14 of the 16 units went through foreclosure. And due to a lack of a quorum, decisions were unable to be made. The operating account dwindled to the point the association could not afford insurance. Units were unable to sell due to the lack of insurance. Eventually, enough units sold for cash, providing enough bodies to accumulate a quorum. In August of 2010, the first homeowners association meeting occurred. The first line of business was to approve the governing docs, elect a board, approve payment for insurance, and begin working on the municipal's punch list of construction and incomplete items, and landscaping. Since this time, over the last 2.5 years, the owners have continued to work to comply with all the municipal requests to correct all outstanding construction items and punch list, installing the landscaping, correcting the culvert and drainage, adjust their annual budgets, and update the governing docs to separate the phases, with the intent to obtain final certificates of occupancy. Currently, we have 7 of the 8 certificate of occupancies, ultimately to pursue financeable properties. Which brings us here today. I've read the staff's recommendations to deny both requests, and I would have to disagree for the following reasons. Again, these owners have inherited these issues and are trying to resolve any outstanding matters with the community. First, in addressing the deck and the 4 of the 7 standards in which the staff felt did not meet or substantially meet the criteria. The exceptional physical circumstance of this particular deck is that it is a small 4-foot wide second floor deck. It was never noticeable until the updated as-built was completed last year. The physical circumstance and exceptional hardship would be, unfortunately, you can't reduce that deck as the door is adjacent to the railing that they're suggesting be reduced. By reducing the deck would alternately prevent the door from opening and creating more of a safety hazard. Alternatively, by removing the door would create another code violation as pertaining to required exits for a 3-story building. Both options would create a more concerning health and safety concern. Criteria 3. The special conditions, as mentioned, this particular unit is an end unit adjacent to a 30-foot setback and far enough away from other neighbors. This condition did not result from the actions of the current owner. Moving on to address the fence and the 6 of the 7 criteria here. It may not have been clear that not only is this a weird corner triangular lot, there's actually a matter of a slope involved on the Brandon Street side. This slope inhibits these owners to enjoy the rights in what we believe to be the backyard. Unfortunately, there is not much of a yard to be had, and these folks would deeply feel they would lose their yard. I did bring a picture. I brought some additional pictures so you could see the size of the deck, the minimal backyard, and whatnot. So if you're welcome to see these. Further, by reducing the fence from 8 foot to 4 foot, would in essence create a fence almost level to Brandon Street, and consequently, potentially create another hazard. If someone were to think if they, in the winter, they could jump this short little fence, if we were to reduce it to 4 feet, landing on the other side would be kind of a eye-opener for them and potentially hazardous. The staff made mention that keeping the 8-foot fence could potentially create a detriment to the neighborhood. On the contrary, as mentioned in my prior statement, by keeping the 8-foot fence would actually protect everyone on both sides of that fence. Criteria 5. The mention that the fence may negatively impact the streetscape of the walling off. I would argue that given the adjacent land is an easement currently used for parking of the neighbors and the high-traffic street, which is Brandon Street, which would most likely be upgraded to include repaving and sidewalks. This was a step in the right direction in assisting the community with future upgrades. Number 7, and finally, this is a weird-shaped lot, which owners have inherited from a bankrupt builder. Their only desire is to work with the community to help and enhance the neighborhood and protect those on either side of the fence. We believe that the standards have been met or substantially been met and would appreciate you approving both variances. Do you have any questions?
Are there any questions for the petitioner? Mr. Cars.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Cantrell, just to confirm, the fence is an 8-foot-high fence.
It is, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. And second clarification, this might be for staff as well. Our variance request, the second variance request was to allow an 8-foot fence in the secondary front yard setback along the west boundary. I believe we're talking about the the fence along the east boundary?
I think what they meant was the west boundary of Brandon Street, not of Silver Fox.
But we're talking about this property, so.
The fence on
relative to
Brandon
the-
Street, it would be the west property line of Brandon.
I'm not talking about Brandon. I'm talking about, this is for, the variance is for this lot.
You're correct, Mr. Cars. Through the chair, Mr. Cars.
It's the east boundary.
Yeah, east and west can get confusing, right and left.
Right.
It's the east boundary of the petition site.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Correct. Apologize.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Ms. Dahl?
What is the height of the fence when measured from the other side, the side that's not 8 foot high? That's not from the ground, but the other side of the fence?
Correct, on the property side. We believe there's about 4 to 5 feet. We'd really be pushing 5 feet. So if you were standing on Brandon and you look straight at the fence, if we took 4 feet off, it would leave a foot, if less, of fence if we were to cut it down.
Mr. Ron?
Thank you, through the chair. Ms. Cantrell, you mentioned backyard enjoyment by the condo owners. Do the condos potentially affected by this fence in the backyard impact? They have back doors on the first floor units. How is the access from these units to the backyard area?
On the second floor, off the dining room area, they have a door which they push outward to get out to the deck.
And do those decks then have stairs down to the backyard?
No, they do not. It's a pretty tall, high building.
Ms. Dahl, did you have another question? for the
I did. Could you clarify then, or help me remember what you said about egress and safety if the deck had to be cut off?
Sure. If we had to reduce, as you go out that door, the door is right on the edge. We're on the corner where it's impeding into the setback. And then once you go out, it's a 4-foot deck. And I have a picture I'd be happy to show, if that would help.
If you turn in the picture, it'll have to remain with us until the appeal period's up.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
If you do turn that in as part of your case, we'll have to retain that until the appeal period is up for this
That's fine.
variance hearing. Okay. Bring it forward. We'll stamp it in as part of your case filing. Thank you. Are there any other questions for the petitioner? I have one. I just want to kind of clarify in my mind. So Brandon Street is actually elevated above the basic grade for the lot. That's correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What kind of traffic would you say is on Brandon Street right now? Is that a fairly busy street?
It is a very busy street. In fact, actually, the Muni just installed a roundabout at the corner of Huffman and Brandon.
Okay.
So
So
we're
you
just
get a
2
lot of
blocks.
traffic through the community?
I'm sorry?
You get a lot of traffic down Brandon Street through the
Yes, sir.
community? Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. You have 2.5, well, basically almost 3 minutes left for rebuttal. So,
All these folks here are here for Huffman Woods.
okay.
So it doesn't appear there may be anybody
Okay.
else.
So we're finished with the petitioner's presentation. Did staff have any questions for the petitioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. What the petitioner's representative said is correct about Brandon Street, even though it's on the official Streets and Highways plan as a local road, just a residential street. At the end of the street is a town center, including a Walgreens on a roundabout, and Brandon, I think, goes all the way through to the Old Seward Highway, Clatt Road, Old Seward.
Huffman. We're just south of
No,
Huffman.
from Huffman. What's the other direction?
Oh, we're between Old Seward and New Seward.
Old Seward. Yeah. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thank you for your testimony, and we'll open it up for a public hearing now. So anyone interested in testifying in this case can come forward. If you would state your name into the record and spell your last name.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
perhaps you'd, if the speakers are all part of the condo association, they are the petitioner, I believe, and all of their time falls within the 10-minute allotment.
Okay.
You might want to let them know that.
All right. Are you all here as part of the condo association? Okay. So we had an additional 2 minutes and 56 seconds left of testimony for the condo association. Is that acceptable to go ahead and?
2 minutes is fine.
Okay. If you would, then state your name for the record and spell your last name.
James Curtis, C-U-R-T-I-S.
Okay.
I live in Huffman Woods Condominium Association. I'm one of the new residents as of 2010. And basically, the points I'd like to make, I'll pretty much just repeat. The deck encroaches 1.2 feet beyond the easement. It would be a safety hazard for emergency egress if there was ever a fire inside the building, to have that door not open if we did make modifications to the deck. If the deck was removed completely, it would alter the appearance of the whole complex. If you can see from the pictures, the construction was relatively new in 2007, and the people that have bought and committed prior to the developer vacating and abandoning the project have done nothing but try to improve the sense of community, and we feel obligated to do the right thing, and we just ask that the zoning board, consider our consideration for variance, because we feel like these are relatively minor accommodations you could make us. In terms of the improvements we've made, landscaping, drainage improvement, pavement additions, we've done that all out of pocket by having a board and charging ourselves monthly accounts to build up our reserves and pay for these things. So we don't take this lightly. We've tried to do everything right. Our whole goal is to get the closing certificate so we could potentially someday make these financeable. In regards to the fence, I'm an engineer, so there is a grade break between the crown of Brandon and the base of where the fence is, and it's approximately 3.5 feet.
Okay.
I'll wrap it up here. The fence also helps to abate noise. Brandon is a very busy street. Since last year, they put in roundabouts on Huffman and Brandon. There's a lot of speeding vehicles that go by our property. The fence has made a difference in terms of knocking some of that noise down. I believe that's the extent of my time.
Okay,
I appreciate your consideration to allow these variances.
thank you. Just a minute, sir. Are there any questions from the board? Mr. Cars?
Yes, thank you. It was Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Do you have the staff packet in front of you? Page 7 of the staff packet.
Yes.
Just for maybe clarification, I caught on, you said these are rather minimal requests. The deck encroachment, it's a 1.2 foot encroachment. On page 7, you're an engineer. About how big of an area in square footage would you say is the deck encroachment into that?
About that much. And basically, it's at about 9 feet above the ground. And so we have letters of non-objections from all of the utilities, Chugach, GCI, the municipality, community group, and municipality of Anchorage, Department of Services, memorandum from the municipality of Anchorage. It's not a very big encroachment, and it is at elevation. Any utility work down on the ground, a backhoe or any other heavy equipment could get easy access to that, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Curtis? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
There's 29 seconds left if anybody else is interested. So let's go to staff for rebuttal. All right, anybody else not associated with the condo association want to testify tonight? Okay. Staff rebuttal then?
I have no more comments. Thank you.
Okay. What about from the petitioner? Did you want to say anything with your 29 seconds? Okay. So the matter rests with the board. I'd like to have a motion on the variance request, and I guess before I take that motion, I'd like to. I think what I'd like to do is have the motion split up into two separate motions, one addressing each one of the variances. So, if I could get a motion on the first variance request on 2140-050-045. I'd like to see that. Mr. Cars is making the motion, and Mr. Vega is seconding. Mr. Cars, would you speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. With respect to case 2013-059, I move that we grant a variance from AMC 2140-045G, minimum yard requirements to allow an existing deck on unit 12695 to encroach 1.2 feet at the maximum point of encroachment into the 10-foot secondary front yard setback, subject to conditions 1 and 2 on page 6 of the staff packet. And perhaps if staff can help me up with on condition 1, striking updated.
That's correct.
From from as-built, the word updated from in front of as-built on condition 1.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. Mr. Vig?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I second Mr. Cars' motion.
Okay.
care to me to speak to the motion?
Sorry, would you go ahead and address the 7 conditions of approval?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I typically look at these encroachments as a whole, and so that was the reason I had asked one of the owners and co-applicants to describe the magnitude of the encroachment. I look at it as de minimis when you look at it with respect to the entire setback. I think we're almost looking at the size of a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, or maybe an 11 by 17 piece of paper when we look at the encroachment as a whole. So I intend to support that motion on the basis of it being de minimis. And following with respect to the findings, I think that's where I'll be going with a number of those findings. The exceptional and extraordinary physical circumstances, again, this is very, very minor variance, although I do feel that the lot orientation with respect to the roads do come into play. And that's pretty much the same argument for standards 2 and 3. I disagree with I'm sorry, I was thinking of the second variance. 2 and 3 are similarly with respect to 3. I looked at the setback, and while I think that the unit could have been built to meet the setback, that this variance wouldn't be required, I don't believe we'd be noticing any significant difference. That building could have been moved a foot, shifted a foot different. So I don't think it was a case of this development being overbuilt with respect to those units, and it doesn't have a significant effect on the unit was not overbuilt, and therefore that's the reason that it's into the setback. I do think that standard 4 is met. Standard 5 is met. Standard 6 is met, and standard 7, again, I do feel it's met. This is a de minimis variance. So for those reasons, I intend to support the motion. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cars. Mr. Bigg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. Kars's findings on with regard to standards 1 and 2, and I think the applicant additionally made mention of the fact of the great separation, or great differential, I should say, between Brandon Street and the property that is somewhat unique to this particular lot. And considering that with the shape of the lot creates some unique circumstances that I think allow me to find standards 1 and 2 to be met, and standard 3 with, again, Mr. Kars, I think, did a good job of describing that this shift did not allow the development to have an increased density over what would it otherwise have been able to be built to. So I find that standard is met, and I agree with staff's analysis on standards 4, 5, and 6, that the standards have all been met. Standard 7, I think it is a minimum variance. It's doing some mental arithmetic, probably less than 2 square feet in area, and I think that's a very minor encroachment into the 10-foot setback that extends throughout the length of this property. And so I find that the 7 standards are met with respect to the deck, and I intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Bigg. Any other comments from the board? I will comment and say that I intend to support the motion, and that I do believe that this is a de minimis variance, that because of the height of the deck and the location, basically the geographic relief that's involved between where the lot is and the road, this is a very unnoticeable encroachment, and that by not granting it, we create some other problems that may be are more onerous on the property owner than granting it. I think that we need to think about the functionality of the structure as it stands, given the fact that this is a very, very, very small encroachment. Mr. Hart, you had a comment?
Can I actually ask a question for clarification, sir?
Sure.
So several board members have mentioned de minimis in the 1,000 pages or so that is in the booklet we've had to read through. Can staff or other board members, I guess, remind me of what this de minimis standard may be, if it is as it relates to finding number 1?
Through the chair, Mr. Hart, thank you for the question. De minimis is a word I looked up, I don't know, last year or something. It's Latin for, so small as to not be noticeable, something along those lines. That's what the word means. And it's a word that's been used to describe an encroachment that is so small as to not be noticed. The standards don't speak to that, but it's been in the past, the board has used that word to describe, or as justification for meeting standard number 7, the minimum variance that will make it possible for reasonable use of the land. This is a pretty difficult standard to meet if you're ignoring the financial impacts of a variance. And so I think that's all I have to say.
From the board's perspective, having been on this board for off and on since 2000, and then staff for the board almost 30 years ago. A de minimis variance is one that is so small that it's barely noticeable. And one of the things that I guess maybe I needed to clarify in my comments is that because of the geography in the area, the fact that the road is elevated, and it looks like this particular lot is depressed below the road grade, and the size of the actual encroachment makes it so that this isn't a noticeable encroachment. Some encroachments are very noticeable. You will see them right off the bat, but this one is not. And that's what I think is extraordinary about this property, is that the elevation and the appearance of this structure, when in relationship to the rest of the surrounding topography, makes this encroachment not noticeable. Mr. Hart?
So to speak to the findings, sir, as much as I feel for the board and for the condo association, until I personally can recollect and review the regulations again to find something related to de minimis as it relates to number 1, I feel as it relates to the deck that standard number 1 is not met. I guess I'm not seeing the topography of the land near the fence to be anything related to the deck. So as it relates to the deck, I'm not finding that standard number 1 is met, but I do find that the rest of the standards are met for the same reasons that staff and board members have listed. So as it relates to the deck, I do not plan to to vote in favor.
Okay, Mr. Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Board Member Hart, I appreciate your comments, and thank you for asking for clarification on this issue of de minimis. Could I ask you to further explain then your argument in Standard 1? Is it specific to Standard Number 1, or would it then carry through to a few of the other standards?
Mr. Chairman, so it's specifically rated to Standard Number 1. That's the one that I've had the most issue with, although I could argue multiple ways for a couple of the other standards. I felt that the rest of the standards were met as it relates to the deck. Standard number 3, the hardship is not self-imposed. I think the board has stated pretty finely that it's not a cause of theirs. It wasn't a cause that they personally did. And sorry, back to standard number 2. I don't think it would create an undue hardship, or excuse me. Standard number 2, I think, is met because it would create a hardship for them if it's if the code was strictly adhered to. Once again, for the deck, standard number 1 is the only one that I really had major issue with, and it's because I don't really see the topography really relating much to the deck.
Okay, are you finished, Mr. Hart?
I could go further into the other findings if you'd like.
No, that's fine, Mr. Hart. I think I understand your position and I appreciate the clarification there. I do. Mr. Chair, if I could make a few comments regarding my position. I do intend to support this motion for the reasons stated by Mr. Kars, Mr. Vig, and Chairman Dunham. And what speaks loudest to me is concern over egress and safety. While we don't perhaps have all the information I'd like to be able to verify those safety concerns, in the absence of them, I would prefer to err on the side of caution, and that side of caution is the side of safety. And I think that weighs most heavily in my mind in supporting the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Ms. Dahl?
I actually agree with what both of Mr. Hart and Mr. Vick have just said. When I look at Standard 1, it seems to me that there's nothing exceptional or extraordinary about the physical circumstances that would justify the deck encroachment. I think that the fact that it's already built and there might be an egress issue is possibly an exceptional physical circumstances, but I'm not quite sure I understood that as being as to how that applied, because it said there was no egress down to the ground level, and I also would think that there would be a way to create an egress that to provide for safety. So I do not believe that the first standard is met for the deck. I do find the slope and of the going to the road and the traffic on the road being a physical circumstances, so that the fence, the Standard 1 is satisfied for the fence encroachment. I think that for 2, you don't even get into that for the deck if you don't find number 1 met because it's based upon those physical circumstances. For the fence, I believe that the strict application of cutting down the fence to 4 feet and only leaving it up to 1 foot from the roadside would be an undue hardship and would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same district, which is more than a 1-foot fence.
We're addressing the deck encroachment.
Oh,
only at
I'm
this
sorry. I thought we had moved on. Or we were addressing both at the same time, so I will.
All right, thank you. Mr. Patrick.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I plan to support this motion. I agree with Mr. Ron and Mr. Kurza that it's both a safety issue along with a very de minimis variance request. I think it's so insignificant that it does not really make a whole lot of difference. So I do plan to support the request. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To speak to the safety issue, I guess I thought that could be solved by doing something else. To me, it appears that the door opens out rather than in, and it seems to me like you could reverse the way the door opens to address some of those safety issues rather than given a variance.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Any other comments from the board? Seeing none, let's vote on this request. Okay, the board's voted, and this variance request has been approved for the second-story encroachment with 6 votes in favor. So I'd like to entertain a motion to on the second variance request. Mr. Cars has made this motion. I need a second.
I'm going to make the motion first, then maybe they'll be comfortable seconding it.
Okay, go ahead and make the motion, Mr. Cars.
Thank you. Yes, with respect to case 2013-059, I move that we grant a variance from AMC 2145-110A fences to allow an 8-foot fence in the secondary front yard setback along the east boundary of the entire site, subject to standards 1 and 3 on page 6 of the staff packet.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. Do I have a second for that motion? Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Cars, could you speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm actually struggling with this variance request, and I'm hoping to have some dialogue from some of the other board members. We've heard from the petitioner and pictures in the staff or in the packet that topography is an issue with respect to the fence. So I can see where standard 1 may be met, and that lends itself to standard 2 possibly being met as well. I'm struggling to find standard 3 being met. 4, we've heard from their letters from the adjacent neighbors saying that they support this variance. So I can see that this variance, if granted, would not adversely affect the use of adjacent property based on the most immediately impacted properties supporting it. Standard 5, I guess standard 5 and 7, I'm trying to see, I'd like some feedback from some of the other board members, but at this time, I can't see that standards 3, 5, and 7 are met.
Okay. Mr. Patrick?
Thank you, sir. I'm like Mr. Cars. I struggle with this also. I can see the first standard being met through topography. On the fourth standard, again, I agree with that. I don't think it's going to be adversely affect the use of the property. But I really would like to hear what the other members have to say about this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from board members on this request? Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May not be ultimately helpful in making up mines because mine's not either. I'm struggling with standard number 5. I ultimately see this as a very long fence that is 4 feet taller than what's allowed by code. And as a member of the public, thinking about this not in relation to standard 4, which speaks to adjacent properties, but more to standard 5 and in keeping with the intent of the code and what's good for the broader community, I do have concern over this expansive long fence that's higher than it should be and how that affects drivers, pedestrians, wildlife, and character. So I am stuck on that point as well and look forward to more discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. Are there any other comments from the board? Mr. Hart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as it relates to the fence, I believe that standard one is met because there appears to be some physical topography that affects the fence. I also believe that standard 2 is met. The standard that I guess I'm struggling with is standard number 5 and the intent of the code. I'm not seeing anything that would sway me to believe that doubling the size of a 4-foot fence would be with the intent of the code. So that's the standard that I'm struggling with, and unless I hear otherwise, I'm not at this point in time intending to support.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hart. Any other comments? Yeah, seeing none, I think I will weigh in on this. I believe that, like Mr. Hart, there are extraordinary physical circumstances about this property that indicate to me that the variance request is met for standard number 1, and that's the difference in height between the road and the fence and the property on the fence that's on property. The fact that it doesn't appear to be an 8-foot fence from Brandon Road really tells me that this is more of a perception thing, just as I believe the encroachment was a perception thing. And that I also believe that, granting the variance, strict application of the code would create an undue hardship for the property owner. Not granting the variance would create an undue hardship. One of the things that I think that the petitioner had mentioned is the fact that, or maybe it was Mr. Curtis, the propagation of noise. And having a quiet place to live, having a quiet backyard, a place where families can enjoy their quiet time is really important. And I think this particular fence goes a long way towards defining that space and creating a quieter place for them to enjoy their activities as a family. And I'm going to address variance number 5. The variance, if granted, is in keeping with the intent of the code and will not create a change of the character of the zoning district in the property it's located, and will not permit a use that is not otherwise permitted in the district in which the property lies. I looked up the actual code section on fences, and under 2145-110B, it says here specifically, in the case of a okay, well, maybe it's not a through lot, but in the case of double frontage lots, they allow the construction of an 8-foot fence if it's fronting a Class 1 collector street or greater. And while I don't believe that Brandon is a Class 1 collector or designated as one right now, and according to Mr. McLaughlin, it's not, it does sound like it's putting off all the character of a Class 1 collector being a major collector in the area. And I think under those circumstances, where while this is not a through lot or a double frontage lot, it does have all the character of a triple frontage lot, and I believe that it is meeting the intent of the code to allow them to build an 8-foot fence here. That would provide the kind of quiet and isolation that, you know, a family would need to enjoy their backyard in this location. I agree with staff that standard number 6 is met on this variance request. And I do believe that it's a minimum variance that would allow reasonable use of the land under number 7. For number 4, I don't believe that it will adversely affect surrounding properties, as Mr. Cars indicated earlier. It sounds like the neighbors agree that the fence is not detrimental. And I believe it's more than just a pecuniary act. The hardship would be more than just pecuniary. It would actually compromise the quality of living at that particular location. So I believe standard number 3 is met as well. Those are my comments. Mr. Cars.
Thank you. I just asked, Ms. Dell, you had started making comments before we had the motion. Would you mind repeating, or I don't know if you were assuming that those were in for the record, would you mind repeating those again?
Sure. I had addressed 1 and 2 before I realized that those were not pertinent to the one we were considering. And for 1, I felt that the slope and it was an exceptional physical circumstance that was applicable and that made the property unusual and unique, because there was testimony that if the fence was cut down to 4 feet, which is what's allowed, that from the road it would be only as high as 1 foot high. So someone on the road would see a 1-foot barrier, and I felt that the slope, that was an exceptional physical circumstance that made the property unique, so that it met the standard of the of having a unique physical reason that would justify having a higher than 4-foot fence. And then with regard to number 2, that if the fence was only 4 foot high, that would deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same district, which is having a greater than 1 foot high separation from the street side to the property. That's where I left it before, if I was to go on to the remaining standards, I think that because the fence is, I guess I would be in, I think that most of Standard 3 is met to the extent that the fence goes up to, is 5 foot high from the street side, then I do think that's not really justified by number 3, in that number 3 addresses the hardship being self-imposed, and I feel that what would be sort of the special conditions and circumstances would be that, if you measured 4 feet from the street side, that, that might be justified, but when they say it might be 5 feet, then I'm just not sure that that there's justification for that. But I would, so I guess the question is whether it's related or unrelated to the physical characteristics of the land. And I guess when you get into less than a foot, I could see supporting that, saying that it was, or saying that the standard was met because it was so close to the line, but I have a little bit of trouble with that. As far as, I guess, it does state that the planning staff found that there was no clear vision area violation. On the other hand, so I don't think that I guess the question is, if the variance is granted, will it adversely affect the use of adjacent property as permitted? And I don't see the neighbors' uses being adversely affected when so many of them said they had no objection. Number 5, I don't see how granting the variance will change the character, will permit a use that is not otherwise permitted. I do see the point that was made about it impacting the streetscape. I guess I could see that standards 6 and 7 are met.
Mr. Patrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your comments, Mr. Ron's comments on this to help clarify some things for me. I intend to support the motion, and because 5 is what I struggled with, and I look at that being a heavy traffic area as they're talking about now, and with what you had pointed out with the Class 1 allowing an 8-foot fence, I sure would hate to make the decision to tell them to take the fence out, put a 4-foot fence in, and then the city come along in a short period of time and declare this a Class 1 and cause them an undue hardship of having to replace that fence. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Mr. Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Due to the comments by the chairman and the previous board member that spoke, and also having driven past these properties on a daily basis for several years, I'm changing my mind and will support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Any other comments from the board? Mr. Cars?
Yes, thank you. And again, reiterating Mr. Hart's comments, appreciating the comments from the other board members. I previously felt that standards 1 and 2 are met. Based on the testimony from the other board members' comments they've made, I can see where the topography of the lot is a reason for finding that both parts A and B of standard 3 are met. And I struggled with 5, and as Mr. Patrick and Mr. Hart had said, the traffic weighs in, potential reclassification of the road, although I don't see that, whether it's reclassified or not. I think it more is the use of the road. But the standard is the variance, if granted, is in keeping with the intent of this code, and will not permit a use that is not otherwise permitted in the district. I don't think that we're providing a different use on a lot. So I can find that standard is at least substantially met. And for those reasons, I intend to support the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Cars. Mr. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Based on board member comments, I reevaluated my position on standard number 5. While my heart is with the future pedestrian who may be impacted by the height of that fence along that stretch, based on comments regarding no change in use and overall intent of the zoning district and code, can find that standards is at least partially met, and will intend to support the motion. For the record, regarding the discussions on noise, I'd like to state that there's no data to indicate that the fence is in fact deflecting or reducing the amount of noise, but often the perception of effect is better than actually having the data to support the reality of it. So I will support the motion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ron. Ms. Dole?
Thank you for that last comment. I think that helps me find that standard is met as well.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, let's vote. Okay. All right, the board's voted, and that variance is granted, passed unanimously. A note to the petitioner here that you'll be receiving a written notice of our action here from the staff, but that decision of the board can be appealed within 30 days of that notice being issued to you. So, and it's not just by people who are in favor of it, anybody opposed to it as well. But just so that you know, there'll be a written resolution presented to the board. The board will vote on it, and then staff will send it out to you. So thank you for coming tonight. Appreciate your time. With that, we are moving out of cases to be heard tonight and moving down to reports. I do not have any from the chair. Is there anything from planning staff?
No, Mr. Chair.
Our next board meeting is June 13th. Is that correct, Mr. McLaughlin?
Apologize, I don't have that in front of me.
Okay. I think we saw that one of the cases was postponed to that date. I'm assuming that that's our hearing date.
That's correct.
Are there any board members planning not to be here that night? I would like to take it off because it's my birthday, but I'll come in. So.
I may not be able to make it, but
Okay.
I don't know yet.
All right.
So.
Thank you. Yeah, I should be here. So. Any other? No committee reports? Don't think we have any committees right now. How about board member comments?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Ron?
I just wanted to commend the board. We had some good open dialogue tonight and participation by everyone, and I think that makes for a better meeting and serves the public's interests.
Yeah, I think it was good. I really appreciate the fact that our two newest board members really got in up to their hips tonight and did a great job kind of helping round out the discussion. I think it's always good for us to have that. Ms. Bullock?
Yeah, I too appreciate the discussion, and I guess just from my knowledge, there was some evidence discussed of the difference in elevation. When is it appropriate to ask that to be proven as opposed to stated by the applicant? I mean, we took their word about the difference, and certainly visually there's some difference, but is it, you see where I'm getting?
I guess it's, the standard that we have is by a preponderance of the evidence. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. So, we're asking them at some point to tell us what they think and for staff to give us their honest opinion of that. And then we have to weigh, which one makes more sense. And in some cases, staff and the petitioner agree, but in the case where they don't, then we have to decide which one makes more sense. I mean, I guess to me, it's always been about what argument makes the most sense for a better community, a better development, a better way of life for the people that have to live with what's there. And we can push harder if that's what you want. I mean, you're certainly welcome to do that.
Well, and I guess I just am wondering the limitations on that, because there are times when it's in their best interest to present their case in a certain manner, and just to have the verification of what that truly is. I mean, seeing some sections through the road relative to the elevation of the top of fence would have clarified it all for me.
I was thinking the same thing, is that a section would have been nice.
And Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
And just as a follow-up to that, Ms. Blad, in the past, a board member has asked for additional survey information provided, and the responsibility is on the applicant to provide us with enough information to make a decision. And if a board member wanted more, they could make a motion to postpone for the next week or till the next hearing for them to provide that information. That's been done before. I think knowing where you're going, for me, it was I think the photos that were there were enough for me to make the inference. But we've in the past went through a process of, hey, we're not getting a lot of information in our packets, survey related, and so the applicant needs to step up and provide more. And if it's definitely within anyone's bounds to ask for that, if they need it.
If I could add to that, I'm interested in Mr. McLaughlin's input here. Could it be appropriate if a board member identifies a need for additional information prior to the meeting to approach staff with that pre-notice of potential request for additional information?
Through the chair, Mr. Ron, yeah, absolutely. The earlier that the packet goes out to the board, and there's not a lot of time for the board to review it in advance of the meeting. But with the other boards and commissions, they will send emails to the planner or just to the planning division with questions as late as 4 o'clock on the night of the meeting. So staff is here to support the board, and certainly any questions the board has at any time, even before the meeting, you can send those questions to us. If we determine that the response needs to be shared with the whole board, or wait until the meeting. But we get questions for particular clarification. So staff could have done a better job of, providing a topo map or weighing in staff, in this case, basically stayed silent. There is a grade difference, but how much does it relate to the need for fence height variance? That's a little bit subjective. But it's accurate that the grade is lower, but it wouldn't even show up really on a topo map. It's just the burden of proof is on the applicant.
The one thing I will add to this is that as we look at this, we're always supposed to evaluate what's presented to us. One of the things that the board used to do when I was staff to the board was go out and look at the sites. We don't do that anymore. We make a decision based on what's presented here before us. And Mr. Hart, you had a comment, and then we'll move to you, Ms. Dole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd just like to thank the board. With me being new here, I'm going to be caught off guard sometimes and not be able to speak off the top of my head regarding all 7 findings. So I apologize if at times I think a little too long when I have the mic. And as it relates to this case, I guess I have a question. When it comes to cases that have multiple variances that are being requested, is it typical to include all of those variances under the standards one time? I found myself getting confused and crossing the variances with all of them included under one section. So if it is possible, and if other board members agree, in the future, if there's multiple variances for one property, it would be beneficial for me at least if we included it like fence and then went through the 7 variances, and then deck and then went through the 7 variances.
I certainly don't have a problem with it, and that's one of the reasons I divided the motion out tonight, is so that we could have a clear discussion about each individual variance. And I think in most cases it's not as confusing as what we had tonight, but we do have cases pretty regularly that have multiple variances for different types of things. So, Ms. Dole?
I had, I guess, 2 questions. One really was for to see what the board thought. One of the factors goes to the intent of the zoning code, and in that regard, I think it might be useful to me to know if what the new code would change, if anything. So, for example, I guess I'm just curious if there is a change and what the change would be, because that might help me know whether a factor is met under the existing code when it looks at sort of the intent and all. So I wonder if that's something we could ask the planning staff to maybe include, if you think it would be useful.
I think when Ms. Ferguson was here, she said that there's going to be some training for all the board members on the new Title 21 requirements, but for the variances that we're considering now, we should be using the current code.
I understand that. The question went, I guess, to the intent and of the code, and just the basic, what. So I guess that was the question that came up.
Okay.
I know we're supposed to use the
I
current
think
code.
that-
I guess partially I'm just curious if, as we're looking at something, if it's changing which way
Yeah.
or not changing.
Well, I can tell you that this has been in the code since the Greater Anchorage Area Borough days. But under 2135.010 is the purpose of the title, and it says that it's to promote logical growth pattern within the municipality and the economic extension of public services and facilities, encourage the most appropriate use of land use throughout the municipality, reduce congestion on streets, enhance safety from fire and other dangers, provide adequate light, air, and open space, preserve property values, prevent the overcrowding of land, avoid undue concentration of population, facilitate adequate provisions for transportation, water, sewer, drainage, schools, parks, and other facilities, and to promote public health, safety, and welfare. That's what I always go back to as kind of the driving force behind our zoning regulations. And I think about, how are we going to, how does that variance request, how is that affected by the purpose of the title? So some of it is very subjective, and I think that we try to address it through the 7 standards, but part of it is understanding, that there's a balancing act between what we need as a community and what the individual needs are for the petitioner. And trying to come at a good solution and meet the standards at the same time.
Okay, thank you. And also thank you for bearing with me as I learn.
Well, I think it's it's good for us to have new opinions on the board, because after a while we kind of start sounding the same. So the discussion about de minimis was interesting tonight, because I don't think we talked about that for probably the last 5 years. And actually it was good. So appreciate it. Any other comments? Seeing none, we're adjourned.